So on top of all this terrible news about our debt, on top of all the terrible news about the government not functioning and Republicans not being able to keep the government open on their own, the bond market is also taking a massive hit. So we had a bond sell-off recently. Now, this is when all the traders go to the Treasury sells off a bunch of bonds, and they have bidding stuff about how much you're going to pay for the bonds, and the market determines the price of these bonds. Mm-hmm. Well, the 30-year bond rate auction topped at a yield high of 4.77%. Now, I'm not an expert on the bond market, but what this means to me is their interest rate for these bonds went up so high because the demand to buy the bonds were so low, they had to encourage investors to buy these bonds, right?
Yep.
So the bid to cover ratio, the dollar amount of bids received, so the dollar cover ratio is one metric that we have to look at if we are to understand the demand of bonds, right? So what is a bid to cover ratio? That is the dollar amount of bids received in a Treasury security auction versus the amount sold. And this is a good gauge of demand. And it fell down to 2.24 from the 2.35 number of October and the average of 2.39. So we're well below average. We're going in a very, very poor direction from last month. And this is making our debt more and more expensive.
Yep.
This is increasing our interest rate. We just talked about 10% of our current federal spending every year, maybe 12% or something like that, goes specifically to interest. When we have poor bond selling like this, that means that that interest rate goes up and up and up on our debt faster and faster and faster.
Yes.
God.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a nightmare, dude.
Yeah,
It's a
and
nightmare.
it all goes together. Like, it's a very cohesive story, right? Poor ability to govern, massive deficits that have been the case for several years, no political interest or will to raise taxes.
None.
Specifically on the Republican side, and I will say that because Democrats are so willing to raise taxes on the rich.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And Republicans are, the problem is that their unwillingness to raise taxes extends to the rich, right? So because of that, we are lacking in our main method, our main mechanism for collecting revenue, and we're not making any progress on the debts that we have.
Yeah.
We're just paying off interest, and we're continuing to borrow. Like, we're in this clear negative spiral where, since we're running at such big deficits, we need to borrow more now to pay the interest of the debts that we already hold, and so we're necessarily creating larger and larger debts, right, that have higher and higher interest rates.
Yes, and we are currently sitting at a debt to GDP ratio of 122%, which is basically what we were at during World War II. 122% is nothing to be like, oh my God, sound the alarm, buzz, 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 freak out. We don't need to be there yet, but we're going to get there really, really fucking fast if we don't have adults sit down and figure out how to fix the fiscal situation of the country immediately.
Yeah.
And it cannot be from hurting the most vulnerable among us. That's not a serious solution. It's not a serious solution to look at the country and say, okay, how can we balance the budget? Okay, take the food stamps away from the grandma. Maybe that's not the way to do it, right? So I'm not going to be on board for anything like that.